The massive silver ships cut through Earth's blue sky like gleaming knives, their surfaces reflecting the sunlight in ways that made watching humans shield their eyes. The vessels moved with a kind of smooth precision that spoke of technology, far beyond what most species achieved in their first 1,000 years of civilization. As they descended toward the landing platform in Seoul, air itself seemed to hum with alien energy. Ambassador Velthak emerged from the lead ship with the measured steps of someone accustomed to being the most important being in any room. His tall, thin frame was covered in what appeared to be living metal that shifted colors with his movements. 3 large eyes dominated his elongated face, each one capable of independent movement as they scanned the assembled human delegation. His expression carried the patient condescension of a teacher about to address particularly slow students. "Greetings, young species," Velthak's voice carried across the platform, his words flowing through a translation device that rendered them in perfect Korean. "We represent the Galactic Confederation, and we are here to guide your civilization toward true enlightenment." Captain Lee Min-ho stood perfectly straight in his crisp black uniform, the golden insignia of Earth's Defense Force catching the light. On his chest, his dark eyes remained fixed on the alien ambassador, noting every detail of their technology and behavior. Years of military training had taught him to observe first and judge later, but something about the alien's tone made his jaw tighten slightly. Beside him, Dr. Park Sora made quick notes on her tablet, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen as she recorded this historic moment. As Earth's lead xenobiologist, she had spent years preparing for this day. But the reality of alien contact was both more exciting and more troubling than she had imagined. The aliens' casual assumption of superiority was immediately apparent. In their body language and tone, "Your species shows unexpected development," Velthak continued, his 3 eyes moving independently as they examined the human technology around them. Landing platforms that could handle ships of any size, energy shields that hummed with barely contained power, and communication arrays that reached across the solar system. "We had anticipated finding a more primitive civilization based on your planet's energy signatures." Commander Kim Ji-won stepped forward slightly, her own uniform bearing the marks of someone who had seen actual combat. Unlike many of her colleagues, she had fought in the resource wars of the 2080s and understood the weight of real conflict. Her weathered hands clasped behind her back as she listened to the alien's words, her mind already cataloging potential threats and advantages. However, Velthak's tone shifted to something that sounded almost disappointed. "We detect troubling signs of your violent past embedded in your social structures. War, conflict, aggression, territorial disputes, these primitive instincts, represent serious developmental flaws that must be corrected before your species can join civilized galactic society." The alien delegation began unpacking large containers from their ships, each one containing what appeared to be educational materials. Holographic displays showed images of peaceful alien worlds, their cities built in perfect harmony with nature, their peoples living in what seemed to be eternal contentment. The message was clear. This was what humanity could become if they abandoned their violent ways. Dr. Park Sora noticed something interesting in the aliens. Presentation materials? While they showed countless examples of peaceful civilizations, there was a complete absence of any military technology or defensive capabilities. Even their ships, while clearly advanced, showed no obvious weapon systems. It was as if the concept of conflict had been entirely removed from their society. "Your species will undergo a comprehensive education program," Velthak announced, gesturing to his assistants who were setting up what appeared to be teaching stations. "We will help you understand the superior methods of resource distribution, conflict resolution, and social organization that have brought peace to thousands of worlds." Captain Lee Min-ho exchanged a meaningful glance with Commander Kim Gi-won. Both veterans had seen enough of the universe to know that peace was usually maintained by those prepared for war, not by those who had forgotten how to fight. The aliens. Complete dismissal of military preparedness struck them as dangerously naive. "Our ancestors overcame such barbaric thinking millennia ago through superior social evolution," one of Velthak's assistants added, his voice carrying the same condescending tone as his superior. True civilization requires abandoning such primitive concepts entirely. As the aliens continued their setup, none of them noticed the subtle tension in the human delegation. These weren't primitive savages grateful for enlightenment. They were experienced soldiers and scientists who had earned their knowledge through struggle and sacrifice. The dismissal of their military history as mere barbarism showed a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. Far beyond the edge of the solar system, in the deep void between stars, ancient sensors began to activate. Automated systems that had slumbered for thousands of years detected the energy signatures of the Confederation ships. Something that had been waiting in the darkness for millennia stirred to life, its mechanical mind processing targets and calculating attack vectors. The Devourers were awakening, and neither the peaceful Confederation nor the combat-ready humans knew that their greatest test was approaching through the empty spaces between worlds. The lessons both species thought they understood were about to be challenged by an enemy that remembered what civilized worlds had chosen to forget. The grand auditorium in Seoul buzzed with quiet conversation as hundreds of Earth's brightest minds gathered for another day of alien education. It's a massive hall, built to host international conferences, now served as a classroom where humanities leaders sat like students before their supposed betters. Professor Ulaneth stood at the center stage, his forearms moving gracefully as he manipulated holographic displays that showed peaceful alien worlds. Today we will discuss the fundamental principles of civilized governance, Ulaneth announced, his voice carrying easily through the advanced sound system. His skin had a blue-green tint that shifted slightly as he spoke, and his large black eyes seemed to look through the human audience rather than at them. Your species continues to organize itself around concepts of competition and conflict, which represents a serious obstacle to your development. Major Choi Dae-yoon adjusted his position in the front row, his military dress uniform crisp and formal. His face showed nothing of what he was thinking, but his dark eyes tracked every movement the alien professor made. Years of combat experience had taught him to watch for weaknesses, and he was beginning to see patterns that troubled him deeply. Military strategy, territorial defense, resource competition, these are the thoughts of primitives, Ulaneth continued, his tone carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining basic concepts to children. We abandoned such thinking. 50,000 years ago, when we achieved true social evolution, the result has been unbroken peace across our territories. Behind Major Choi, Intelligence Officer Han Minji wrote careful notes in her tablet. But she was not recording the professor's words about peaceful governance. Instead, she was documenting every detail about Confederation technology, social structure, and most importantly, their complete lack of defensive thinking. Her trained mind was already identifying critical vulnerabilities that the aliens seemed unaware they were revealing. Dr. Kong Woo-jin, Earth's chief xenobiologist, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As a scientist, he understood the value of evolution and adaptation. But something about the aliens' complete rejection of their own military past struck him as dangerously naive. He raised his hand, waiting for the professor to acknowledge him. Human Ulaneth's tone suggested he was granting a special favor by allowing the question. What happened to the military knowledge your ancestors possessed? Dr. Kang asked carefully. Surely some record remains of how they defended themselves before achieving this peaceful state. The alien professor's expression shifted to something that looked almost like disgust. Irrelevant ancient history, he waved dismissively with two of his forearms. True civilization requires abandoning such barbaric concepts entirely. We purged all such knowledge from our records generations ago. It serves no purpose in an enlightened society. Several humans in the audience exchanged glances. Any military strategist knew that forgetting the lessons of the past was a recipe for disaster. The aliens had not just abandoned their weapons, they had deliberately erased all knowledge of how to fight. But surely, Dr. Kong pressed gently, some defensive measures remain necessary. What about natural disasters or equipment failures? Or we have evolved beyond such primitive concerns, Ulaneth interrupted. Our technology prevents all such problems. Our society has eliminated conflict at its source. We have no need for the violent solutions that still plague your species. As the lecture continued, Han Minji noted something interesting in the holographic displays. The alien cities were beautiful and efficient, but they showed no signs of defensive structures. No walls, no shields, no backup systems. It was as if the very concept of external threats had been completely removed from their thinking, far above Earth's atmosphere. In the depths of space that stretched between stars, something ancient stirred in the darkness. Automated sensors that had been dormant for millennia detected the energy signatures of Confederation ships. The readings were faint, barely detectable, but they were enough to trigger systems that had been waiting patiently for their makers. Return, the Confederation's monitoring stations scattered throughout the Outer Rim picked up the energy signals as minor anomalies. Their peaceful society had no reason to suspect that such faint readings might represent a threat. Their sensors were designed to detect natural phenomena and guide civilian traffic. It's not to watch for enemies that their civilization had forgotten could exist. On Earth, however, humanity's military maintained a different kind of vigilance. Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Seokman sat in the Defense Command Center, his eyes scanning multiple displays that showed readings from humanity's extensive sensor network. Unlike the aliens, humans had learned through bitter experience that peace was maintained by those who remained prepared for war. Colonel, his aide approached with a concerned expression, "We're detecting unusual energy patterns in the outer system. The readings are very faint, but they don't match any known natural phenomena." Yoon Seokman studied the data, his experienced eyes noting patterns that the Confederation's civilian sensors had missed. "How long have these readings been present?" "Started about 2 weeks ago, shortly after the Confederation fleet arrived. But they're getting stronger, and they're moving in a pattern that suggests intelligence behind them." The colonel felt a familiar tension in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced before every major battle of his career. Something was coming, something that the peaceful aliens were completely unprepared to face. Humanity's paranoid scanning, protocols developed through centuries of conflict, had detected what the Confederation's advanced but peaceful technology had missed in the depths of space. The Devourers continued their slow approach, their ancient minds calculating trajectories and analyzing the energy signatures of a civilization that had forgotten how to fight. The first sign of the attack was the silence. Deep space monitoring stations across the Outer Rim simply stopped, transmitting their signals cut off one by one like candles being blown out in a vast darkness. Then came the reports from fleeing civilian ships, massive vessels of impossible design emerging from the void between stars, their hulls seeming to bend light around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Kexnel stood on the bridge of the Confederation flagship, his usually calm demeanor shattered as he watched the tactical displays update with increasingly desperate reports. The enemy ships were unlike anything in their database's geometric structures that seemed to fold in on themselves, their surfaces crawling with energy that devoured everything it touched. His six-fingered hands shook as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This cannot be possible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarms that filled the bridge. "The Devourers were destroyed 50,000 years ago. Our ancestors' final victory was complete." His aide, a young officer whose green skin had turned pale with fear, approached with trembling steps. "Sir, I have been reviewing the ancient records. Our ancestors' accounts were ... incomplete. The Devourers were not destroyed. They were driven back into the deep void. They have been waiting." The truth hit Admiral Kexnel like a physical blow. His peaceful civilization had inherited victory without understanding the price that had been paid for it. The ancient enemy had not been defeated, merely forced to retreat and rebuild in the darkness between galaxies. Now they had returned, and the Confederation had no memory of how to fight them. Captain Lee Minho stood beside the alien commander, his human eyes taking in the tactical situation with the trained assessment of a career soldier. Fleets were scattering in all directions, their captains clearly having no idea how to respond to coordinated enemy action. Ships that had been designed for exploration and peaceful contact were trying to flee from predators that moved with the fluid precision of a wolf pack. "Your people," Admiral Kexenol turned to Lee with desperate hope in his alien eyes. Your violent history that we have been trying to correct. Do you know how to fight things like this? Lee studied the enemy formations on the display, noting the way the Devourer's ships moved in perfect coordination, covering each other's advances and cutting off escape routes with mechanical precision. They are not acting like living beings, he observed quietly. These are automated systems, programmed by an intelligence that understood warfare at a level your people have forgotten. On Earth, the emergency sirens wailed across every major city as humanity's military machine shifted into full combat mode. General Park Jin-soo stood in the war room beneath Seoul, surrounded by displays showing the deployment of Earth's fleets. His weathered face showed no emotion as he gave orders that would send millions of humans into battle against an enemy they had never seen. All battle groups are to move to assigned positions, he commanded, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos around him. This is not a drill. Major Song Haijin worked frantically at her station, coordinating supply lines and logistics with the speed that came from years of military training.
Wow.
Her fingers flew across multiple keyboards as she calculated ammunition requirements, fuel, consumption, and medical supplies for a war that humanity had not asked for but would fight regardless. Supply convoys are moving to forward positions, she reported. All industrial facilities are shifting to wartime production. We will be ready. Commander Na Tae-young stood before a massive display, showing the enemy's attack patterns, his analytical mind working to understand how the Devourers thought and moved. Each destroyed Confederation ship provided more data, and a terrifying picture was emerging from the tactical analysis. They are not just weapons, he said to the assembled officers. They are learning from each engagement, adapting their tactics. Based on what they observe, this is not conquest. This is systematic extermination. Colonel Bae Jungkook studied the recordings from the first attacks, his experienced eyes noting details that the panicking aliens had missed. Look at how they coordinate their movements. He pointed to specific formations on the screen. Each ship knows exactly where the others will be. They are not communicating. They are operating as parts of a single mind. The Confederation's peaceful society had spent millennia breeding out their capacity for strategic thinking, believing that such skills were primitive and unnecessary. Now, faced with an enemy that their own ancestors had fought, they found themselves helpless. Their advanced technology meant nothing without the knowledge of how to use it in battle, as colony after colony fell to the advancing Devourers. The death toll climbed into the billions. Its entire worlds were stripped of life in ours, their populations consumed by machines that had been designed for a single purpose: the complete elimination of organic intelligence. The Confederation's leaders watched in horror as their peaceful civilization crumbled before an enemy they had forgotten how to fight. In desperation, turned to humanity, the violent, primitive species they had come to educate. The irony was not lost on Admiral Kexenol, as he formally requested military assistance from beings his people had dismissed as barbaric. The teachers had become students, and the lesson they needed to learn was written in the language of war that only humans still remembered. How to speak. The space around the burning remains of the Confederation colony shimmered as Admiral Lim Yemen's fleet dropped out of hyperspace with perfect timing. His ships moved like hunting wolves, each vessel positioned exactly where it needed to be according to battle plans that had been refined through centuries of human conflict. The Devourers had expected another panicked retreat like they had seen from the alien fleets, but instead they found themselves facing something they had never encountered. All units execute Formation Delta 7, Admiral Lim commanded from his flagship's bridge. His voice was calm and steady, showing none of the fear that had paralyzed the Confederation forces. Around him, his officers worked with the smooth efficiency of a machine that had been built for war. The human ships spread out in a pattern that seemed random to the watching aliens, but each movement was calculated to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining escape routes. The Devourers' mechanical minds tried to process this new formation, but their programming had been designed to counter the predictable tactics of peaceful civilizations. The Devourers expect Confederation tactics, General Park explained to the mixed command staff aboard the flagship. Alien observers stood alongside human officers, watching displays that showed the battle unfolding in real time. They had been programmed to counter peaceful civilizations that fight defensively, but they have never faced a species that remembers how to truly fight. Captain Osung-wan led the first wave of the counterattack, his squadron of destroyers, moving in a weaving pattern that confused the ancient enemy. Where the Confederation ships had tried to flee in straight lines, the human vessels darted and twisted like angry hornets, striking at weak points and disappearing before the Devourers could respond effectively. Enemy formation is beginning to lose cohesion, reported his tactical officer, as the Devourer ships struggled to maintain their perfect geometry. They are adapting, but slowly. The human attack was not about overwhelming firepower. It was about exploiting the enemy's assumptions. The Devourers had been programmed to fight an enemy that valued preservation over victory, but humans had learned different lessons from their violent history. They fought to win, even if it meant accepting terrible losses. Ambassador Veltok stood in the observation deck, his three eyes wide with amazement as he watched the tactical displays. The human fleet moved with a coordination that seemed impossible, without the kind of hive-mind thinking that the Devourers possessed. Yet each ship operated independently, making decisions that supported the overall strategy. How did you develop such complex strategies? He asked Colonel Shin Yujin, who was monitoring the battle from the command center. Your species has only been spacefaring for a few centuries, yet you fight with techniques that seem far more advanced than anything we have seen. Colonel Shin looked up from her displays, her face showing the weariness of someone who had spent a lifetime studying the art of war. Pain, she replied simply. Every war we fought, every mistake we made, every victory we earned, we remembered. It all we learned because we had to. The alien ambassador did not understand immediately, but as the battle continued, the truth became clear. The Confederation had achieved peace by forgetting how to fight, but humans had achieved wisdom by remembering every lesson that conflict had taught them. Each tactical maneuver being executed by the human fleet had been paid for with blood in some past war on Earth. Lieutenant Commander Jung Houn worked frantically in the engineering section, her teams analyzing wreckage from destroyed Devourer ships. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but human engineers had learned to adapt and improvise in ways that the peaceful Confederation had never needed to develop. I think I understand how their shields work, she reported to the command staff. If we modify our weapons to pulse at specific frequencies, we can overload their defensive systems. Within hours, human factories were producing new ammunition, based on captured Devourer technology. Apt and innovate in the middle of battle was something that could only come from a species that had fought countless wars against enemies who were constantly changing their tactics. Major Quan Summon's intelligence division had set up a prediction center that analyzed every piece of data from the battle. Her analysts worked around the clock, studying the patterns in Devourer movements and developing models that could anticipate their next actions with frightening accuracy. They are not truly adaptive, she explained to the command staff. Are programmed to learn, but only within certain parameters. If we force them into situations outside their programming, they become predictable. The tide of battle began to turn as human tactics proved effective against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. The Devourer's perfect formations, cracked under assault patterns they had never encountered, their mechanical minds struggling to process strategies that came from organic creativity rather than programmed responses. As the final Devourer fleet was destroyed in the Outer Rim, the galaxy fell silent. The ancient threat that had haunted civilization for 50,000 years was finally ended, not by superior technology or peaceful evolution, but by the hard-won wisdom of a species that had never forgotten how to survive. In the aftermath, as human ships moved through the debris fields, searching for survivors, the Confederation leaders finally understood what they had lost when they chose to forget their violent past. Peace was not the absence of the ability to fight it, it was the presence of those strong enough to defend it. The Great Hall in Seoul had been transformed for the most important gathering in galactic history. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the massive space, their diverse forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have been impossible to imagine just months before. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something resembling understanding, Ambassador Velthek stood at the central podium, his three eyes looking out over the assembled delegates with an expression very different from the condescension he had shown during his first visit to Earth. The proud alien who had once dismissed humanity as primitive now spoke with the humble voice of someone who had learned a terrible lesson. "We were wrong," he admitted, his words carrying clearly through the advanced sound system. "We thought we had evolved beyond the need for military knowledge. We believed that forgetting how to fight made us civilized. Instead, we had simply forgotten the lessons our ancestors paid for with blood." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of recent losses. Entire worlds had been consumed by the Devourers, while the Confederation's peaceful fleets fled in panic. Billions had died because their protectors had forgotten how to protect them. Fleet. Admiral Kim Hunwoo rose from his seat among the human delegation, his weathered face showing the marks of a lifetime spent in service to others. His uniform bore the ribbons of countless battles, but also the newer decorations that marked his role in saving galactic civilization itself. "Peace is not the absence of conflict," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak on such matters. "It is the presence of those strong enough to defend it. Your ancestors understood this truth, but somewhere along the way, your people chose to forget it. The Soul Peace Accords were signed that day, but not as humanity's integration into galactic society as originally planned. Instead, they formalized humanity's new role as the galaxy's guardians and teachers. The species that had been dismissed as barbaric would now be responsible for protecting civilizations that had evolved beyond the ability to protect themselves." In the coastal city of Busan, construction crews worked around the clock to build the Confederation's first military academy in 50,000 years. The gleaming complex rose from the shores of the Pacific Ocean, its design combining human practicality with alien technology. Soon, cadets from across the galaxy would come to learn the arts of war from the species that had never forgotten them. Commander Li Suyang found herself in the strange position of teaching psychological warfare to species that had never experienced fear. Her classroom was filled with alien cadets whose peaceful societies had bred out the very instincts that made warfare possible. "Fear is not weakness," she explained to a group of crystalline beings who communicated through light patterns. "Is information. It tells you when danger is present and helps you respond appropriately. Your ancestors felt fear. It kept them alive long enough to become your ancestors." The concept was difficult for beings who had known only peace, but slowly, they began to understand. Fear, aggression, and the willingness to fight were not flaws to be corrected, but tools to be understood and controlled. Major Park Minkyu taught logistics to civilizations that had forgotten what scarcity meant. Students came from worlds where resources were managed by automated systems that had never failed, where the very concept of running out of supplies was foreign. War is not won by the bravest soldiers or the most advanced weapons, he explained to a class of floating jellyfish-like creatures. It is won by the side that can keep fighting when the other side runs out of ammunition, food, or fuel. Your ancestors knew this, but your perfect systems have made you forget. Dr. Yu Giwan observed the cultural exchange programs with fascination. As Earth's leading xenopsychologist, she had studied dozens of alien species, but watching them learn to think like warriors was both enlightening and troubling. "Your species carries a burden," she said to Captain Choi Youngman, as they watched human instructors training alien cadets in combat tactics. "You remember pain so the rest of us can forget it. That is a heavy responsibility." Captain Choi nodded. Understanding the weight of what humanity had accepted, they had become the galaxy's guardians, not through conquest or force, but through the simple act of remembering what others had chosen to forget. It was a role that required constant vigilance and the willingness to face dangers that peaceful civilizations could not even imagine. The first joint human-alien patrol fleets departed Earth 6 months after the signing of the Accords. Human commanders worked alongside alien officers who were still learning to think strategically. While alien technology was integrated with human tactical doctrine, the result was a new kind of fleet, one that combined the best of both peaceful and warlike civilizations. As the ships disappeared into hyperspace, Captain Choi reflected on humanity's new purpose. They had become teachers in the most literal sense, passing on knowledge that had been earned through suffering and sacrifice. The galaxy was safer now. It's protected by those who understood that sometimes the greatest act of civilization was the willingness to fight for it. The stars stretched endlessly before them, vast and full of unknown dangers. But for the first time, in 50,000 years, the galaxy was defended by those who remembered how to defend it. The lesson had been learned, written in the blood of billions, and humanity would ensure it was never forgotten again.